Hello everyone. So in this video we are going to focus on the first group of plant in terms of evolution, and that's it, the non-vascular plants. Before going to do that, let's remind ourselves that the evolutionary pathway of plants took three major events. So as shown in this phylogenetic tree, so the ancestral were the green algae, and then the first step was the origin of plants, land plants. That was the first group we are covering today in this video. So that's the non-vascular plants started first, and this group is called the Bryophytes, as you will see later on. Then, as you can see here, they are non-vascular plants. So the next step in evolution was the origin of vascular plants here. So all this, the remaining three groups were characterized by being vascular plants. The first of which was called seedless vascular plant. So that indicates that the next step in evolution was the appearance of seed plants. So the seed plants include the gymnosperms and the angiosperms. So we are going to focus on this video on the first group, which is the non-vascular plants. More or less similar to the previous figure, we can show that the events started from the ancestral green algae. The first event was the evolution of the non-vascular plants. Then the vascular plants appeared, the first of which was seedless vascular plants. Then we started to have those with seeds. The first was the gymnosperms, and then we have the angiosperms appearing later on. So we are going to focus on the non-vascular plants in this video. So the non-vascular plants, they are called Bryophytes, and they are presented by three phyla as shown in this figure. So this figure highlights that we are in this group, the non-vascular plants, and highlights the fact that they are composed of three phyla: the liverworts, the hornworts, and the mosses. One characteristic thing about the non-vascular plants is that the gametophytes are the dominant stage of the life cycle. If you remember, we said alteration of generations is something characteristic for land plants. So we have two stages, the gametophytes and the sporophytes. So in the non-vascular plant, the gametophyte is the dominant stage. So whenever you think of mosses, this greeny mossy structure is the gametophyte, because this is the dominant stage. It is the stage that is going to do the photosynthesis. And we will find that this is characteristic for the non-vascular plants, because once we move on to the vascular plant, which include the other three groups, once we move on to the vascular plants, we will see that the sporophyte is the dominant stage. So if you think of any vascular plant like a tree or something, so what you will see, the majority of the tree and the part you see doing the photosynthesis, that represents the sporophyte. But this is different in the non-vascular plants like the mosses, because the gametophyte is the dominant stage. So we have already discussed the general life cycle of a plant. So it's the same here for the non-vascular plants. We will highlight just some few points. So starting here with this sporophyte. So the sporophyte is the brownish structure there. So this is the young sporophyte. It is still forming, as you can see, and developing. So the sporophyte, now after being mature, it is this brown structure which is carried on top of the gametophyte. So the green part is the gametophyte, the brown part is the sporophyte. So the sporophyte is composed of a capsule, which is called the sporangium, as we said before. So if you remember, the sporangium is the organ in which the spores will be formed. and then we have a seta, and then we have a foot that carries the sporophyte and connected to the gametophyte. So sporophytes are diploid stage, if you remember, because it's formed by the fertilization of two gametes. Then through meiosis we are going to end up with spores. Spores are haploid structure. They will be dispersed, and then spores will germinate to form the gametophyte. So when the spores will be dispersed, this step will happen during the dry conditions. So once the conditions are dry, the capsule will open up, and actually the cap closing the capsule is will be released, pop up at the dry conditions, and now we have what we call peristome, through which the spores will be released in the dry conditions, as we said. Each spore will germinate. It will give rise to a gametophyte. Some of these gametophytes are the female gametophyte, others will be male gametophyte. So this is one thing to highlight here in the non-vascular plants, is that we have separate sexes. So the male gametophyte and the female gametophytes are carried on different plants. So the male gametophyte is carrying the male gametangia or the antheridia, where the sperms will be formed. For the female one, it is carrying the archegonia, where the eggs are going to be formed. One thing to highlight here is that the sperms are flagellated, and they need water in order to swim to fertilize the egg within the archegonia. So as you can see here, they are surrounded by water, drops of water, and even the fertilization step is shown here surrounded by water, because this is important. Without the water, the sperms will not be able to fertilize the egg, and fertilization will not happen. And that highlights why these plants need to grow close to water. This is one reason why they need to grow close to water, because of reproduction or fertilization needs the swim of the sperms, and this requires the presence of water. Okay, so once fertilization happen, then we will have this zygote. So fertilization will bring us back to a diploid structure. This zygote will grow to form the sporophyte, and the cycle will continue again. Okay, so let's quickly highlight the main important points in the gametophyte and in the sporophyte within the bryophyte. If you remember, bryophytes are the non-vascular plants like the moss. So one thing to start with is the presence of rhizoids. So gametophytes, they have these rhizoids, and they function as structures that anchor the gametophyte to substrate. So it could be a surface like a piece of rock embedded in the water, and as you can see, it is for anchoring, so support. So these plants, as you remember, they grow in aquatic environment. So in order to support themselves, and they don't become washed away with the water, and that highlights that it is not actually a root. It may look like a root, but it is not functioning as a true root, because it doesn't help in the uptake of water and nutrients. All what it does is just anchoring or support. So then one point to highlight is that the gametophyte is the dominant stage, and it produces flagellated sperms in antheridia and egg in the archegonium. Then as you can see here, the sperm is flagellated, and they are produced in antheridium, and then they swim to move to the archegonium, where the fertilization will happen. So that's are the main points within the gametophyte, and also, as we said, the male and the female gametophytes, they are separate. Then when we move on to the sporophytes, so the sporophytes, they grow out of the archegonia, because remember, fertilization will happen in the archegonia, and the zygote is going to be formed within the archegonia. So the sporophyte will grow out of this zygote, and the sporophyte is composed of a capsule, which is the sporangium, and then seta, like a stalk, and then a foot at the end, and the capsule is going to discharge the spores through a peristome. So if you remember, once the conditions are dry, the cap is going to pop up, and now the peristome, this opening, will is the place where the spores are going to be dispersed. This is another image depicting the same concept, that the gametophyte is the main or the dominant stage which carries the sporophyte. The sporophyte is composed of a capsule, seta, and foot. So to summarize the characteristics of the non-vascular plants and how they dealt with the different challenges of living on land. So starting with the extreme temperature changes, as we said, they produce spores. These spores, similar to the spores of plants, they are thickened with sporopollen in order to withstand the extreme conditions. This could be high temperature conditions, or also it could be extreme of high temperature or cold conditions, and the spores will be there like a dominant stage. They will remain dominant till the conditions become favorable, and then they will form the gametophytes. How they dealt with the segregation of light, water, and nutrients? By staying small. So by staying small, and one reason because they don't have the vascular tissues that allow them to grow big, so they will stay small in order to supply the nutrients without having a dedicated transport system. And also because if they grow large, they are going to shade themselves from the light. So in order not to compete with themselves, it is better to stay small. It is better to stay small, especially near water, because that will help solving the problem of evaporation, especially since they are not covered with a waxy cuticle, and only some of them they have the stomata. Also, how they are going to overcome the problem of reproduction in this dry environment. So as we said, stay near to the water, and the sperm needs water in order to swim to the egg for fertilization. And that highlights why the mosses are always found in damp or humid environments near water, and not in dry conditions away from water. They don't have physical support. That's why also it is better for them to stay small. Once we come to the ecological and economical importance of mosses, although mosses are not hugely distributed on lands on Earth, and one reason for that, as you can see, because they are dependent on the presence of water, and because of that they were not very good colonizer of different areas on land. But however, they still have some economical and ecological importance, and many studies have shown that they are important in retaining nitrogen in the soil. So as depicted in this figure, so this is the result of one of these studies. If we have mosses, about 95% of the nitrogen is going to return back in the soil. It's going to retain in the soil, and because of that, the loss of nitrogen is going to be minor loss compared to the loss that you will get without mosses. So mosses are important in retaining nitrogen in the soil. And that's it regarding the non-vascular plants. Thank you so much.